tested positive for COVID, and with fairly mild symptoms. But I'm on the mend, which is good. I actually, when I got tested today, was negative, but I think just out of an abundance of caution, because I do feel like I still have a little bit of a cough and congestion. I thought it would be better for me to be remote tonight. So with that said, I'm gonna ask Mayor Pro Tem Donna Boland to take over the meeting, at least for a couple of minutes, to get us started, and ask if you would be so kind to council to allow me to participate remotely. Donna, the floor is yours. Your first official act as Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay, I would like to call the meeting of the Bloomington City Council to order. Madam Clerk, can you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Motney,
Here.
Councilmember Emig,
Present.
Councilmember Becker,
Here.
Councilmember Urban,
Here.
Councilmember Ward,
Here.
Councilmember Crable,
Here.
Councilmember Crumpler,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Boland.
Here. And I would like to have a motion to allow the mayor to attend virtually.
So moved.
Okay, moved by Alderman Durbin, second by Alderman Ward.
Councilmember Motney,
Yes.
Councilmember Emig,
Yes.
Councilmember Becker,
Yes.
Councilmember Urban,
Yes.
Councilmember Ward,
Aye.
Councilmember Crable,
Yes.
Councilmember Crumpler,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Boland.
Yes.
Thank you. And I just wanted to note for the record that the mayor is attending remotely for medical reasons. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all very much. I was advised to speak a little louder. I hope this is better. Maybe by thumbs. Okay, all right. Thank you very much. So we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is public comment. Madam Clerk, do we have any public comment?
Mayor, we did not receive any public comment by email or registration.
Next item on the agenda is Can everybody hear me now? Okay, good. Sorry, from time to time, my headset goes in and out for some reason that I've yet to figure out. So you'll have to forgive me. So we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda, which only has one item?
I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Okay, moved by Councilmember Crumpler, and second, I thought I heard Councilmember Urban.
Mayor, it was, yeah, Councilmember Emig.
Oh, Councilmember Ewing, sorry. All right, this is interesting and challenging at the same time, and fun. Okay, so Madam Clerk, do we have a link to approve electronically?
We were actually just going to do it by roll call, if that's okay,
Roll
Mayor.
call?
Thank
Okay,
you.
let's do that.
All right. Mayor Pro Tem Boland,
Yes.
Councilmember Motney,
Yes.
Councilmember Emig,
Yes.
Councilmember Becker,
Yes.
Councilmember Urban,
Yes.
Councilmember Ward,
Aye.
Councilmember Crumpler,
Yes.
Councilmember Crable.
Yes.
keeping you on your toes. Thanks. Sorry.
Okay, awesome. The item passes. There are no nays to announce. Our next item on the regular agenda is a presentation and discussion of Connect Transit's budget as requested by the administration department. And there is no motion. This is a presentation only by David Brown and Ryan Whitehouse. So I'm going to turn it over to City Manager Gleason to see if he has any introductory remarks.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is actually a mutual request. One of this council of the Connect Transit and the city's representatives, but also of Connect Transit of the board chair, Ryan Whitehouse, the other City of Bloomington representative, Judy Buchanan, and the general manager, David Braun, to present the budget presentation to council. Last week, as a reminder, we did approve the FY23 budget. So this is after the fact, but both parties, us requesting and they requesting, wanted to present and discuss how the dollars are being used. Ryan?
On now? Yeah. After what we went through, technology should be easier for me, but in 2020, well, thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council, City Administration for the opportunity to come speak. I'm going to be brief. This is really David's presentation. I'll be here to answer any questions. I also want to introduce David, Tim did, but Judy Buchanan, another appointee. Thank you for allowing us to be representatives from the City of Bloomington on Connect Transit. He has met with many of you, but this is his first presentation. So I formally want to introduce David Brown to this city council as our general manager. He's been here 8 months after a national search. We're very happy with the selection that the board chose. And I just want to, before I turn it over to David, thank each and every one of you for taking the time to hear us from time to time, to give us feedback and to hold us accountable to provide a service to our community. You're going to see in this budget, I'm very, very proud. Connect Transit is strong, and our financial standing is strong as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to David, and if there's any questions, we'll take them afterwards. So David.
Thank you, Ryan. And thank you for having me here to present our budget. We're not asking for anything additional. This is really setting you up for what we plan to do as Connect Transit for the city and for the town moving forward. So next slide, please. As Ryan said, we have a strong leadership, a strong board that I've had the opportunity to work with considerably, working on the strategy of Connect Transit, who we are and where we want to be, not only in the next year, but in the next 5 to 10 years. We've had excellent conversations, and I think that it's reflected in our budget, our priorities, and where we intend to go. Next slide, please. Our organization is relatively flat. We have a number of directors, and they report directly to me. That really allows us to do a lot of things. That allows us to work together, to put something on the street and the service that is really necessary under the guidance of the board and under the direction of myself. With me here tonight is Pat Kubrick. Pat is our Director of Finance, and he was very instrumental in putting together this budget. But something that was also a little different is that we did a zero-based budget this year. Since I'm new to the system, we really looked at not only what we need to provide, but how we need to provide it, looking at the resources we have, and then what we should be providing in the future. And we really kind of stripped it clean and then built it up into what we're presenting tonight. Next slide, please. Our services, I think many of you are familiar. We have a fixed route and a mobility service. Our mobility service meets the requirements of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that is a requirement. It's something that we don't have an option to provide, but something that is a welcome service that we provide to a market of passengers who really can't ride our fixed route service. Over the past years, as you can see down below, from 2019 to 2021, we lost ridership, but we're slowly gaining that back in fiscal year 22. And year to date, we've seen a 17.5% increase in fixed route ridership and 34.55% increase in mobility ridership. The mobility ridership is quite interesting because we did, by your graces, reduce our fares to a one fare for all. Our fare reduced significantly for people using Connect Mobility. And as a result, I think that people are willing to travel more often, and that's led to an increase in ridership. Next slide, please. One of the new services that we're proposing this year is a route expansion to serve Rivian motors. We would actually run a U-shaped route going from Uptown Normal to Rivian, and then down past the OSF, so down Rivian Motorway to Market Street, and then Market Street into downtown Bloomington, and back and forth. The route itself would take a full 2 hours to do, so we're requiring 4 buses to run it every 30 minutes. And that would allow us to run in the peak periods and serve the majority of their employees. This is something that we hope to provide by July of this year. One of the key issues that we have, 4 buses are required, but we don't have those 4 buses in the fleet right now. So we are looking at a short-term operating lease to lease about 3 buses that have been rehabilitated, refurbished, I guess, to operate this service. And we would do that under an operating lease so that we can utilize Illinois state monies to cover the operating expense. Next slide, please. We also have a new service that we're proposing. It's called microtransit. And you've probably heard a lot of app-based type services. Well, this is exactly that type of thing. It's meant to serve neighborhoods that would be a little more difficult to serve. The way that Bloomington was established, that it has a traditional grid system in the older parts of town, but as the newer parts expanded, there's only one access point to a very large neighborhood behind that one access point from a large street. So I think that what I've seen a lot of is that people would be interested in using the bus, but accessing the bus from their neighborhood might require a half mile to a quarter mile walk through the neighborhood just to get to that access point on the main road. This would provide areas that have limited access or currently no access whatsoever to order the bus via an app, a cell phone app, and then that bus would travel and pick them up either at a virtual stop, so maybe at the end of a street corner or something like that. But it would be accessible, so people with disabilities would be able to use the bus, and it would feed into the system. So this isn't an alternative to Connect Mobility. It's really providing access to the fixed route system from the neighborhoods that aren't currently being served. And the next slide actually gives an example of what that looks like. So you can see in the southwestern portion of town, there's very little service. As a matter of fact, there's no service right now. I believe that service was cut a number of years ago. In the red zone, kind of the pink zone that you can see here, that would be a microtransit zone. So the vehicle would serve within that zone, people wanting to go point to point from maybe a neighborhood, the Fox Creek neighborhood, for example, to Ferraro. They would be able to do that within the microtransit vehicle. If they wanted to go outside the zone, if they wanted to go to downtown Bloomington or Uptown Normal, they would actually connect to a fixed route bus at one of the stops or at the downtown transfer area. So it really expands the availability of service in an efficient manner, and that we're only serving those people who are demanding it at the time. And we're standing still. We're not constantly running that bus, just waiting for people to board the bus. A smaller vehicle allows us to access it. And it's really a new service that a lot of cities are adopting, and it works quite well. It would work quite well for Bloomington and Normal. Next slide, please. Another proposed new service is a coordinated van pool sponsorship. So we're not proposing to operate the van pool. We're not proposing to coordinate the van pool. What we would like to do is contract with a provider who would provide those coordination services. The coordination services would look at people who live outside the area who are traveling to Bloomington for work primarily. And I think a lot of you might be familiar with this through State Farm, who had a van pool service of their own prior to COVID. What this allows, though, is rather than a large company having to commit resources to run a van pool of their own, this allows multiple companies, employees of multiple companies to gather where they live and travel to work at similar times of day. Also, a very efficient way to travel. We would not be providing any vehicles. We wouldn't be providing any support staff of our own. Again, we would be contracting on a per van basis we're proposing a company called Commute to Enterprise or Commute with Enterprise. Enterprise is, as you know, a rental car agency. They have local maintenance and they would provide the vehicles based on this coordination model. So as for people, next slide, please. I'll go over this a little bit. As people express their interest via a web app or a phone call to Enterprise, when 4 or more people match origins, match travel times, match close nearby destinations, the van pool would be created. It's a volunteer driver. That driver would be an employee of someone else, not of Connect Transit. They would be driving to work anyway, typically, and they would just agree to pick up those 4 people on a daily basis and travel in the vehicle that is provided to them. The volunteer driver does get some free miles of their own so that they can use that van on the weekends or to serve their own needs. The van pool supplies the fuel for that van and they share the costs. The van pool coordinator provides the app. They provide the manpower, the vehicles, the insurance, and then roadside assistance if there is any issues along the way, and they provide the maintenance. So it's a tremendous program that would really expand the ability for people to get to work. Next slide, please. So for the employers in the area, they don't have to commit their own resources to providing this service, which I think is tremendous. It brings people together so that they can actually come into Bloomington to work. It reduces the need for parking, and it really provides access to employees. There are likely people the first slide showed about one major employer and where their employees live within a 50-mile radius. 35,000 people a day commute into Bloomington, according to the EDC. There are likely others that don't have cars, don't have reliable transportation, that could work here in Bloomington, but just don't have the means. So this is to provide those means and also provide an efficient way to get into the area to work. For the employee, it's access to those jobs that are available here. Less traffic-related stress. If you're just a rider, you ride on the vehicle. You don't drive. You have less cost for vehicle maintenance, cost for fuel, cost for insurance, and so on. For Connect Transit, it really helps us fulfill our mission. Our mission is to provide access to opportunities here in the Bloomington Normal area. And this provides that level of access. It also, and to be perfectly transparent, if we're able to attract 30 vans or more, we'll also be able to attract more federal subsidy. So we meet under the Small Transit Intensive Communities funding. We meet 3 criteria right now. This would allow us to take 1 more criteria and we would get the value of that criteria, and that's about $500,000 a year. So 30 vans for us would be about $160,000. Of that, we would get a $500,000 return. And of that, the city's, well, actually the local portion, which could either be federal subsidy or local subsidy, would really be only less than 35% of that. 65% is covered by the state of Illinois. So it's a tremendous investment into something that would draw more funds, make us more sustainable for the future, but also serve the employers of the area. Next slide, please. So now we'll get into our operating budget. As with everything, our budget has increased. You can see labor and benefits has increased primarily because the cost of benefits, but also because of the additional services that we're proposing. Fuel and lubricants, we just don't know where fuel is. We've been blessed to have a contract that has allowed us to contract for that fuel at a much lower rate than it's being sold for now. but that contract expires in October and we just don't know where it's going to go. So we did substantially increase fuel and lubricants. Bus repair and maintenance, our bus repair costs have gone up significantly only because of the cost of parts. Some of our parts have increased over 100%. Our vendors are telling us to expect at least a 15% increase. So with the addition of more fleet and some additional costs, you can see that our bus repair costs have gone up as well. Insurance, professional services, those types of things are all going up. So the key to this, though, is that labor and benefits are still the vast majority of our budget. So when people are talking about the cost of big buses versus small buses and things like that, really the cost of that bus is behind the seat, is driving that bus. We are always looking for efficiency. And I think that you'll see over the next years and that we will be adjusting our routes, adjusting our schedules so that we are trying to maximize the number of people on that bus and when people are riding. Next slide, please. Our revenues, as I mentioned, most of them come from the downstate operating grants. So 65% of our operating is reimbursed from the state. That's a flat 65%. Our budget can go up and it'll be 65%. Bloomington's share of the operating hasn't changed. We did not request any more than we had in previous years. And that's about 4.4% of our entire budget. Normal share is about 3.4%. And then with contract fares, passenger fares, and advertising and miscellaneous, we've made up a little bit more than that. So the remainder, what doesn't get covered by the local and by some of our other fare media and advertising revenue, is made up by FTA operating. So that's the small transit intensive cities grant, as well as some CARES Act funding and some residual funding that we've had from recent years. I wanted to mention advertising and miscellaneous. This year's advertising program changed quite a bit. In the past, we actually had our internal staff selling advertising, and we would get about $100,000 a year on average in advertising revenue. For that $100,000, though, we had labor costs. So say $70,000 to $80,000 was labor cost to earn that $100,000. We decided not to use internal staff this year, and we've contracted that service out. Instead of having labor that sells the advertising, we actually contracted out to an advertising sales company, and they have guaranteed us a revenue of $115,000. So not only are we increasing our revenue by about $15,000, but we also don't have the expense. So the net increase is actually $115,000. Something that we hadn't done before and something that the board has supported. Next slide, please. So I shared this with some of you, but this is how we compare as a transit agency to other transit agencies in the state. You can see we're at the top line, but we're the second most efficient in terms of cost per service hour, second only to Decatur, which is general fund funded agency. A lot of what happens in a city that runs it through a general fund is that things are allocated differently. So they have their own attorneys. They don't necessarily apply those to transit. So I think that we're still very efficient, even compared to Decatur. When you look at the others are transit districts. So they're taxing authorities, which we don't have. So you'll see that as a taxing authority, many of them have a much higher cost per hour, which is how we measure efficiency. We're the second highest in utilization. A lot of that is attributable to ISU. And we're the second lowest in local contribution. Again, only to Decatur. Next slide, please. So we have a number of planned capital projects. And even though they hit this year in terms of our plan, these are for funds that can be used over the next 5 years. And I'm not going to read through all of them, but our transit center is a big part of this. And then we also have some additional transportation planning that we'd like to do to make sure that we're operating in the areas that we need to operate with the services that we'd like to operate in. We also plan to purchase some more electric buses. We have 4 currently. We have 8 on order. So by the end of this year, we'll have 12. And then we have another 5 that, that we're expanding the fleet with. We'll likely get those in 2024. Okay, next slide, please. One of the big capital projects that we have, obviously, is our transit center in downtown Bloomington. Now, we're still going through the NEPA process, the National Environmental Protection Act, that they make sure that our facility, the federally funded facility, will meet within, will serve well the environment around it. So it has a little to do with environmental with a capital E. A lot of it is a small e environment, that it's not disturbing the areas around it with our use. We have looked at the Pantograph site. We have looked at the Market Street site. What we're currently looking at from a Market Street perspective is that we would have our transit center on the Market Street level. So it would actually be flat. Kind of if you look at 3D, it would be flat from Market Street to Monroe Street, and that's where all of our buses would go. On Monroe Street, we would build hopefully with the city's partnership, we would build a multi-level deck that would serve over 200 cars. We could also build some retail as part of our federal funding. And then obviously we would want the post office there as well. So temporarily we would lose some parking as we were developing the site, but we hope to then again increase that parking as we develop the site even further. We're looking at, I believe the best case scenario for grand opening would be October of 2024. That's if the NEPA comes back. We're not concerned about any sort of environmental issues or historical issues. A reasonable case, just given the length of time things go through the federal process, is 2026. So next, please. All right. I believe I've shared this with you as well, but in 2020, we actually had an economic development study performed. And for every $1 invested in Connect Transit by the city and town, it attracts $11 in additional support for Connect Transit operations. And that makes sense given what you put in and the amount that we're able to get from the feds and the state. We generated indirectly and directly 387 jobs, and that's people who use transit to get to work and rely on transit to get to work. Those jobs created income. That income got turned over in the economy to the level of about 45 million. So the study summarized that for every $1 spent by us, $5 was returned to the economy. That means that for every $1 that's spent by you, actually generates about $60 in return to the economy. So even though transit is a high valued asset, we believe that we also provide something that is structurally important, and we are part of the fabric of the community, and we help the community run. Next slide, please. I want to thank you again for supporting us in the past. And I look forward to working with you in the future as we continue to work together to develop the services that we need for this community. Thank you. And I am open for questions.
Okay. Thank you very much, David. A great job, first time in front of council. And I'm working here right now. My screen is completely up, but I've been told that Councilmember Bullitt has some questions.
Okay.
Well, I have a lot of questions, but primarily I'd like you to explain how that pink zone or red zone in Ward 2 would work. Most of the people that live in the den are probably not going to be working at Ferraro.
Oh, sure.
Possibly the people that live between May and Morse might. That's the lower income neighborhoods. More than likely, they could come from out of town or from Normal for that matter. So explain how this is going to work, because you said something about accessing a fixed route with these little
Correct.
buses.
Correct. So our fixed route system would continue to serve up to that zone. I think that you saw a couple of routes that actually touched upon that zone or actually entered that zone a little bit. If someone wanted to go to, say, Ferrara or the neighborhood adjacent to that area, they could take a fixed route into the zone, connect to a small microtransit bus, and then that microtransit bus would take them to their final destination. Alternatively, they can go from microtransit and really hail it via an app or a telephone if they don't have a smartphone. They would hail the vehicle. It would likely be there within 10 minutes because it is only about a 5-mile zone, and then take them to connect to a fixed route bus. That connection could either be done downtown. If it were serving an area to the north, it could be a connection uptown or a connection at the time that a fixed route bus would go. So it would be coordinated so that the smaller vehicle would connect to the larger vehicle and then the larger vehicle would connect them to the rest of the system.
Okay.
So it becomes really a network of buses.
I would hope in the future that there is some more expansion because the option to fixed routes is Maine by the McDonald's
Correct.
or Alexander, and Alexander doesn't have any sidewalks. So I'm just throwing that out there. I
Sure.
appreciate that you're taking Ward 2 into account and all. And I had some other questions. I think you probably answered them. But some of the numbers, like the economic impact numbers, I sort of question them. Partly because I think they're assuming a median income for Bloomington, which is 50,000. But I would say the majority of the riders fall below that. And also, I've mentioned this, Ryan, and I've talked about this in the past. The numbers speak to passenger when actually they are rides. You don't track how many times. It's like every time somebody gets on a bus, they're counted. So if someone has to transfer, they get on, they get off transfer, so they get on and then get off. And then on the way home, it's the same. So that one person could account for rides. So
Sure.
do you see what I'm saying? I think that some of the numbers.
I do, and I'm not sure that the economic development study dealt with ridership as much as the value of the people that were actually going to work or from work or the employees that we have ourselves. So I think that I don't know that shopping was part of that. And Ryan, I wasn't here at the time, so you might have more of an answer to that. But studies are studies, they are what they are, but certainly I understand your comment.
Well, I appreciate and really value doing these studies and certainly ISU's program, but this is going to sound very rude, but I'm into numbers and math. Numbers out are only as good as numbers in.
Sure.
And so that's why I'm bringing up, are they only using median income versus the number of people that ride the bus are probably closer to 25 or 30,000 a year as revenue, as income. And that would change disposable income, how much they would spend. These are the same people that are having trouble paying rent, in other words.
Right. Sure.
So,
Sure.
but I appreciate all you're doing here. Thank you for doing something about Ward 2. And in the future, I hope that it expands a little bit more.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Bolin. I do believe next we have Councilmember Ward, Crumpler, Amy, and Councilmember Urban and Councilmember Crable.
Okay, well, I'll jump in while there's still time. Before I do though, Mr. Whitehouse, did you want to make any comment? Okay. Okay, thanks for this presentation. I really appreciate you running through this, and I really appreciate all that you're doing for the community and for Connect Transit. So
Thank you.
welcome aboard, if I can
Thank you.
say that, 8 months later. I had a couple of questions about the Better Bus Stops design and construction. Can you expand, expand a little bit on what all is involved there and what you have in mind for the future?
Absolutely. So as you know, a number of years ago, we decided to try to make all of our bus stops accessible here in the community. And we received some federal funding from Senator Duckworth, as I recall. With federal funding also comes a lot of federal requirements. So for every bus stop, we have to have a NEPA review. We have to look at all of the housing in the area, determine whether or not it's historical, and if that bus stop would then impact the housing and the area. So we have started, we are about halfway through the program. The program will continue on this year and next, and we plan to have it done in fiscal year 2024. That means that every route will have a bus, or every bus stop will be accessible either with a pad. Sidewalks fall under your realm, but we've been working very closely into trying to get those sidewalks so that our bus stop is fully accessible. But even a pad from the bus to the sidewalk or off the bus at the site is valuable to someone who has some mobility issues. So we're either providing a pad with the stop, shelter at a lot of locations that are a little wider and also accessible so that people using wheelchairs can actually sit within the shelter. Or we're providing something called a semi seat. And a semi seat, you've probably seen those, little blue seats that surround a bus stop. And that just allows somebody to sit down and kind of rest while they're waiting for a bus rather than having to stand at that stop. So we're making it not only convenient, but safe for our customers. And again, we are on track to complete that project by 2024.
And just in follow up to that, I appreciate that. And I appreciate seeing those little seats. What I am curious about is what percentage of bus stops will have covered shelters, and how, is there an algorithm, or how is that decided? That one bus stop gets a covered shelter and another doesn't. And Mr. Whitehouse, you and I have had some conversation about a particular rather busy bus stop that has neither. And I'm eager to see if there's, any movement and possibility on that one in particular.
I'm not exactly sure, but I can tell you sometimes the property owner doesn't want us to build a shelter. So we'll be able to put a pad in the utility space, but we're not able to put a shelter because the property owner just doesn't want one there. So to the extent possible, we try to do it based on ridership, but there are other realities as well. Ryan, you want to?
Yes.
Councilmember, thanks. And yeah, so I was just going to clarify. I know humans are data and data are humans, but a lot of that we look at where a lot of people are riding, and that's, limited resources is where we'll decide where we're going to put those shelters. We'd love to cover them all, but limited resources.
Yeah, I can think of one where we've approached the property owner a number of times and they're just unwilling to give us an easement. So we're just unwilling to, or unable to put a shelter there where it really makes sense. Any other questions?
Okay, was that a council member Ward?
Well, I'll just make one comment. I hope that perhaps if there are future discussions about route changes, and I know that's a touchy subject sometimes, but that could be taken into account, the feasibility of having a covered shelter, I think is important to that decision. That's
Understood.
all I'll say.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Ward. Before we go any further, I think we are past our time. So if I could get a motion and a second and to
I'll make a
extend
motion. I'll make a motion for 15 more minutes.
15 more minutes, 1-5. Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
Yes, I'll second.
Okay, second by Councilmember Ward. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
How do I do that?
Sorry. Okay, so we have Councilmember Bolin,
Yes.
Councilmember Motney,
Yes.
Councilmember Emig,
Yes.
Councilmember Becker,
Yes.
Councilmember Urban,
Yes.
Councilmember Ward,
Aye.
Councilmember Crable,
Yes.
Councilmember Crumpler.
Yes.
And sorry, if I could just for 2 seconds, when your mic goes green, it just means we have too many mics on. And so the mayor and I are working to keep a tally of how you're, who's wanting to speak. So if you see it turn green, we've got you on the list. And then the next person might just have to turn off. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much. We have 15 more minutes. So it's my understanding that Councilmember Crumpler turned off his light, so no question, because you were next.
Right.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So next on the list is Councilmember Emig.
Mayor, sorry to interrupt you. Crumpler had turned off his mic so that somebody else could speak. He was, it
Oh.
was green. So if we could have him back, that'd be great. Thanks.
Oh, I see. Okay, all right. You're back on, Councilmember Crumpler.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a couple of quick questions. David, thank you for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. I wonder, I'm sort of picking up on the idea that Councilmember Bolin brought forward. Did you survey members of the, in terms of the van pool and the micro transit, they seem like exciting, ideas for us. I wonder if you surveyed people in those communities, whether they would actually be interested in use that service. And is there a plan to, if it's successful, are there plans to expand it into other parts of Bloomington?
For the van pool, the larger employers we've spoken to them through Enterprise, the company that we would contract with. So it would be really the employers that would be driving whether or not their employees would do it. They would communicate with their employees. Employers would be able to subsidize the service. And we're planning to subsidize the service to a small portion of the van cost. Like I said, about 35,000 people ride, and those employers, those major employers like Rivian and like State Farm have expressed interest.
Okay.
We just don't have the ability to do that as a transit system. And that's why we're looking to a third-party provider. The microtransit, on the other hand, that's actually something that we'll do a planning study for. So
Okay.
as we're looking at our routes and making sure that they serve the right areas, part of that is also making sure that we're serving it with the right type of service. So lower density areas will likely not have a fixed route bus, but might have a microtransit solution, or areas that are underserved, or areas that just aren't convenient to serve with a fixed route bus.
Okay, thank you. And excuse me, my second question, you talked about contracting or using rehab buses for the Rivian route.
Correct.
And I understand that you're purchasing, is that, am I hear 9 electric buses this next year?
So the buses that we're getting this year will be replacement of old 2003 buses.
Okay.
So we're still running those buses in service. We also ordered some that will replace the 2010s and 2011s, but we don't anticipate getting those until 24 or 25.
Okay.
So in order to start the service as early as July, we'll be leasing some buses, some refurbished buses. They're 2010 vehicles. We have very similar vehicles in the fleet, so we don't need to purchase more inventory. So we thought that as a stopgap, we would lease some vehicles until we're able to get the new buses online.
Would it be fair to say that there are a number of aging buses in the fleet currently, and that potentially that will be increasing your budget for repair and maintenance over the next few years?
Actually, it's a similar bus to what we're having right now. Or what we have right now. So I think that losing the 2003s will actually be a gain.
Okay.
Putting some 2010s in their place to some degree will probably be a wash, or maybe even a bit of a gain.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, Councilmember Crumpler. I think next is Councilmember Emig.
Yes, thank you for the presentation, David.
You're welcome.
So I have a follow-up about the microtransit system. Would you be charging the same amount of fare as you would for a regular rider, or is it to be determined?
That is to be determined. Our board would set the fares. I'm there to implement, so that'll be a discussion that we'll have with the board as we get closer to that time.
Great. That would be something I would be interested in hearing about as you proceed. And is Rivian going to contribute at all financially to the service that will be provided to their employees, or will the employees pay for that? I'm just wondering how that's going to work.
We're hoping to establish what we call a universal access agreement. We have one with ISU, with Wesley and Heartland right now. And we would develop an agreement with Rivian so that if their employees have a badge or something like that, they would be able to ride the bus for free.
The fixed route, well, the initial part of the presentation about contracting or sending several buses to Rivian just to serve that community.
Thank you. Yeah, and the nice thing about that too is that it expands our service to that western portion of Bloomington. And it serves areas that we don't serve right now. So like the OSF prompt care and things like that, that it is available to the public. It's not a exclusive Rivian service, and it provides greater opportunities as the city and the town grow.
With the van pool.
No, this is actually
Okay.
with the fixed
Now I'm-
route. Yeah,
Okay.
the fixed route would go down Rivian Motorway, and we don't currently have any service
Right.
that far west.
Yeah, that makes sense, given the numbers. And I just want to applaud efforts to address coverage, because I think this community strongly supported that in previous iterations of Connect Transit planning. And we wanted our constituents to be served. And I hear that you're trying to do that. So I appreciate it. But you're also seeking out kind of new ways to think of ridership.
Right.
Really happy about the electric vehicles.
Good.
Hope that maybe the micro vans or the micro transit perhaps can become electric. Maybe RJ Scringe can help out with that one, but that would be a great service. And finally, I just am curious about an update on the MOU, which perhaps you can speak to, Tim, later or as part of the end of this conversation. Okay.
Just to follow up, we have asked for a congressional discretionary grant for those microtransit vehicles, and we have asked them to be electric. So we should learn hopefully early next year whether or not we would be successful in that. And then as those fleets become available, we'll be able to purchase electric.
Okay, thank you very much. We are at about, we have another 10 minutes left, just so everybody knows. So we're good to move to Councilmember Prairie.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, David. Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate the presentation and all that Connect Transit does in the community. We've been focusing on the Better Bus Stop campaign to make them more ADA accessible. One question I wanted, and also too, I like the fact that the Connect Transit Board is more representative, I believe, of the community than what it used to be. When we talk about a new transfer station and one of those options being the Market Street garage area, are you looking at how to make that as ADA accessible, as ADA welcoming as possible?
Absolutely, yeah. The design that we've actually looked at, and again, a lot of things are up in the air. No designs have been finalized. These are all conceptual at this point. But the design that we're looking at would allow for not only an elevator from basically 20 feet below, which is where the transit center would be located, up to the Monroe Street side, so that people getting off the bus could get onto an elevator and go to the top floor, which would be Monroe Street. It would also allow us to do escalators. So people with limited mobility, but don't necessarily have to use an elevator, could stand on their own. They would be able to use an escalator to get from that first floor up. And then there are some other engineering things like kind of the modified step, so that it's not a step from Market Street to Monroe, but it's more of a series of lower platforms that people could get up without having to walk the steep hill. So we're looking at any number of design alternatives. And we will definitely engage the community, and especially the community of people with disabilities as we're designing these things, so that we know that people who use our service or need our service will be served.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer.
Sure.
So I didn't, in looking at the expenses, I did see something for a messaging consultant.
That is true.
What is that for?
So what we don't do very well is we don't sell Connect Transit very well. And as you know, the EDC is also going through a messaging campaign, trying to determine how people perceive Bloomington Normal, and why people would want to live here, why people would want to move here. I think that our messaging campaign would dovetail on that. Not only move here, but try to get people to understand that Connect Transit is a big part. We're part of the infrastructure of this community, and we haven't done that well. We've spoken about our app, and we've certainly been available, but we haven't put that clear messaging out. And I think that the messaging consultant would be a combination of creating that message, determining what the community believes Connect Transit is and should be, but also using some of those funds to promote that within the community, whether it be advertising, whether it be more communications outreach, things like that.
Thank you. One last question. Our goal is to have the Hamilton Extension project started this year.
Okay.
And has there been any thought with regard to how that could impact what Connect Transit does with possibly adding stops and things like that?
Please.
I'll take that, because that is something that we have talked about, right? So the Hamilton Road will allow us to put a bus to the VA clinic, right? That's one of the things that we've heard. And we do have a bus that's within an acceptable means, but we've made that commitment to the public. And once we can get a bus down there, we've in the past, and planners, was a position that we need to fill, but we are looking at how we can continue that bus through there so that bus can get closer to the VA clinic. I think that's what you're referring to, Mr. Grable.
One of the things, yes, thank you. Thank you very much, both of you.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Craybill. I believe next is Councilmember Urban.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, David, for this presentation and taking the time out with your team to come and talk to us. I really do appreciate seeing some good news coming from Connect Transit. And so with that, I want to comment to the micro transit that you're proposing in your presentation. That definitely affects a much needed area that needs transportation. What I didn't catch or didn't hear or didn't see is when you actually plan to launch that exciting program.
So there will be, as I mentioned, some planning involved, and we'll have to determine what the best locations are, the best way to access those locations, and also the zone size. What would make it a convenient service to use, being able to get the responsiveness within about a 10-minute pickup window. So we're looking at actually late spring of next year, by the time we do the planning studies, get it approved, and then get the vehicles here to provide that service. So we don't currently have those small vehicles as I showed in the presentation. But those are something that we have not only a grant request for, but we'd need to purchase. So we're looking at next spring would be the kickoff.
So not until next spring.
Correct.
So I would just come back to that, and for me, and just having seen all of this and heard all the things that you say, that is really huge. The microtransit program is a tremendous thing that we see here. Potentially getting people to a fixed route could get them out of their vehicles and onto the come ride with us on Connect Transit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that speaks to a lot of things that a lot of us on council really care about: green space, fuel emissions, make a livable city, clean environment, right? All of those priorities tie into that. And heaven forbid that Connect Transit become profitable. So I want to really see a lot of progress there, right? So if next spring I'm still sitting here and you come and you say, hey, look, I've got microtransit, now I want financing. You're more likely to get a yes if you're showing that kind of effort to us in reality. And so I appreciate that this effort is in front of me now. And I want you to realize that I'm acknowledging that and thanking you for that.
Absolutely. And I will make my commitment here that I hope to keep you more apprised as we've done in the past. I hope to put out more of a quarterly statement, try to meet with you more regularly, and just let you know what's happening at Connect Transit. I think, as we were talking about the messaging campaign, that's one of our biggest failures, is communicating with the city and the town who sponsor us and who support us. So that's a commitment I've made to Ryan, and that's a commitment I'll make to you here, is that I hope to meet with you more often and let you know how things are progressing, the things that we just talked about tonight.
Okay, thank you both. I believe is okay. Sorry, my mic is playing a number of me on me here. But Councilmember Motley is next, I believe.
Hey, so David, thank you very much. And I've really appreciated the time we've spent together. So thank you for those outside conversations. Just two quick things. Number one, I think you alluded to this on these van pools, the enterprise project. Is there going to be a campaign for large employers to be able to contribute in subsidy of that program?
Yes, so we would subsidize each van, and I'm proposing to the board at our next board meeting a $500 per van subsidy. The van cost is about $1,200 per van for about 4 passengers. The remaining subsidy would either be paid by the passengers, the riders themselves, or companies would be able to contribute on behalf of their employees.
Just my thought there is that given the demand for employees in this area, perhaps you'd be able to get sufficient contributions from the large employers to cover that cost. So that's just one. And then secondly, if you don't mind, if you haven't already, maybe just to send that Stevenson Center study to us.
Absolutely.
That would be great.
Will do.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councilmember Motley. I believe this was the last question, correct? Okay. And
It was, Mayor.
Okay, and I think Tim, you were going to make some additional comments as well.
I did, very brief. There were 3 things that I was going to comment to regarding the possibility of Market Street being the downtown transfer station. This is premature at the beginning conversations with council and the community. Also have reached out to some of the partners, LifeSil specifically, to ask them to help be a part of the solution when we talk about accessibility. See what their partners might have out there in the state or in the, somewhere in the United States where they have accomplished similar engineering challenges, 1. 2, Alderwoman Emig asked about the IGA with Connect Transit. We have both corporation councils running the lead on that. Pam Reese, the city manager for the town, and I had met. It's probably been a couple of months ago, and we had handed that off to their corporation council to consider some of the red line changes. I'm gonna say early March, so we are definitely due for a response. Expect that at any time now. And then lastly, was going to just comment to the partnership that we have and appreciate the increased conversation. David, I know that you made that pledge to council coming into this position, and it definitely is appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all very much. David, Ryan, we definitely appreciate you coming to give us an update on Connect Transit and look forward to future updates. So thank you. Next on the agenda is item 5B. It's an update on council initiatives, and I'm going to turn it over to City Manager Gleason.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, and to the community. We have 4 active council initiatives, and last month made the pledge to the community that we would provide an update to the community on at the Committee of the Whole today. Priority honestly was the FY23 budget that was approved last week. While we have had some staff work towards completing these initiatives, not completely done. There's not a need to reaffirm the initiatives. Staff know the direction that we have. We are going to present updates on all 4 and then turn it back to the mayor for questions, comments, if there are any, to any of the 4 council initiatives. We do have one question that we will hold to the very end related to one of the council initiatives. That's a staff ask of council. The first 2 are going to be presented by Deputy City Manager Tyus, and then I have the last 2, and then Mayor, it's coming back to you to take us around the dais.
Thank you, Tim. Phil, next slide, please. As the manager said, we're going to run through these initiatives and then have a conversation about what is presented and see if you have any questions for us. The first is the requester was Councilmember Emig, and it was for the formation of a green infrastructure committee. Next slide, please, Phil. In terms of what the ask was, you can see it on the screen there. Really, this I believe this was prompted out of the summer floods and our work to do hydraulic modeling and some of the East Street Basin work, et cetera, just to really work to incorporate green infrastructure into that work. And so as part of the early conversation, we believe that some of you asked, well, what are we already doing? And so the next several slides are really a listing of some of the things that are doing. It's obviously not an all-encompassing list, but wanted to give you an idea of some of the things that we are already doing related to greening in our community and green infrastructure and some of the other things that are happening. And so Phil, next slide, please. There are, and I don't intend for you to be able to read or see all these or memorize them. It's really to give you more of an idea of the volume of work that's happening. There are a lot of things that are already going on. Some are big and noticeable. Some are small and maybe not so noticeable. If you look at this list, I'll call out a couple, especially you talk about landscaping and open space and storm management code requirements. Every new development in our community has a landscaping and open space and storm management requirement. It's built into the existing code. And what that means is that there are requirements for stormwater removal on sites. But when you think about landscaping, it's not just for aesthetics. When you see trees in parking lots and plantings in parking lots, it helps with stormwater management so that it's not just runoff off of the impermeable, the hard surface. And so it really, when you have plantings, it helps a lot with that. And again, every new development has a requirement for that. You talk about parkland dedication. With every new development, there's an offsetting requirement to provide land for parks or payment in lieu. And so someone comes in and wants to subdivide and develop, there's a requirement that they provide land for parks, again, for outdoor greening of our community. Prescribed prairie burnings and the natural ecological maintenance of, we have a number of prairie burnings across 285 acres of our community. It reduces mowing and helps with reducing the amount of chemicals that we use as well. When you talk about drainage, we have requirements, or we've worked to remove farming from city land adjacent to our reservoirs. Farming occurs on some of the richest land in our community, but with that comes nitrates. And so when you have a situation like that where farms are adjacent to reservoirs, you can have nitrate runoff. So we work hard to remove farming operations near reservoirs. You talk about things such as bioswales, and I'm sorry, next slide, please, Phil. Bioswales and natural routing features. You don't notice those, but they're throughout our community, where there are drains and natural ditch-like structures that are built to route water so that we don't have excessive runoff. Those are throughout our community. So again, there are a number of things like that that are happening that perhaps some are not aware of, or folks in our community are not aware of. And so we wanted to give you an idea of some of the things that we're doing. Part of the initiative request referenced the East Street Basin and the hydraulic modeling. And if you'll go to the next slide, please, Phil. We wanted to give you an idea of some of the things that are happening specific to those projects. With the East Street Basin, we've seen some preliminary designs that'll be coming your way very, very soon. We're still reviewing those, where you'll have wetland entry into the actual structure that can help with some of the filtration and the slowing of the drainage. You'll have native grasses along the perimeter. But the thing that we're excited about is we've talked about having permeable pavers on Prairie Street along the basin, where they're not just completely solid structures, where drainage can happen throughout the pavers as it goes into the basin, so that it is allowed to soak into the ground versus running off onto adjacent streets. You talk about some of the sewer separation that we're doing. Again, bioswales that we talked about will be a significant part of that, and smaller things like rain gardens and other possibilities as space and funds allow. We've had some preliminary conversations with you about the downtown streetscape project, and again, working to build in potential for bioswales and rain gardens and other things that can help with drainage as part of that proposed development. And so one of the things that Tim talked about as a question as we go through this will be, obviously there's never enough, I'll say it that way, but we are doing a number of different things, and we'll do more. The question to you will become, is the committee something that you want to do based on some of the things that we're showing that we are already doing? And if so, we do have a possible structure for a committee should you choose to move forward with that. And so I'll save that for the end, if you don't mind, the possible structure, and we can get to that question at the end. Okay, Phil, can you go through 2 slides? One more, and then one more. Thank you, sir. The next initiative that we'll discuss was requested by Alderman, former Alderperson Jamie Matthey. And next slide, please, Phil. This was the request where he talked about wanting to create an incentive program for areas identified as regeneration areas and preservation areas in the 2015 to 2035 comprehensive plan. That was called Bring It On Bloomington. There were areas identified by those titles that I'll show on the next slide. Next slide, please, Phil. I don't know if everyone was familiar with where those areas actually were, but the orange area was identified as what is called a preservation area, and the pink fuchsia-ish color is identified as a regeneration area. Generally, very generally, I think we know the community. We all know and agree that those areas are areas where we want to work to make physical improvements to housing and some of the other issues being faced. Very generally, in the regeneration area, there is a higher concentration of properties with declining property values. There are some socioeconomic issues that go on that we as a community are and should be willing to address. Some of those challenges have made private investment difficult. And again, it's an area that is targeted as one that needs some care, I'll say it that way. The preservation area is one that has probably the highest concentration of historic homes, but some of them are older. And again, over the years, some have fallen into disrepair and need some assistance as well. So those are the 2 areas that he talked about targeting for an incentive program. Simultaneously, there has been a housing study commissioned by the EDC that is looking at some of the needs for this community as it relates to housing throughout the community. It's involved the city, it's involved the EDC, it's involved the town, it's involved others to really look at what our priorities should be. And so, Phil, if you'll go to the next slide, please. It's looking at all of those different things and helping us to identify what our needs are and what we should be prioritizing. And so our recommendation is, obviously we don't want to wait too long, but it would be to wait to create that program, that incentive program, whatever it would be, until that study was completed. And it's not far off. They're anticipating that it'll be done by the end of April. And so, but that study will give us, in our opinion, a better idea of what our priorities should be for new construction, what our priorities should be for rehabilitation in building and infill. It'll give us an idea of, should we be focusing more on rental versus home ownership, what size homes, those kinds of things. And so really allows us to be intentional if we were to allow that study to help us to drive our program in what we would be financing through incentives. So our recommendation would be to wait to get that study and then base what we would propose, at least in part, on what that study identified as priorities. And again, the bullet talking about our being in a rare place in Illinois, we're a community where we've got stable population, we've got good wages, we've got wages that are above national averages, we've got a thriving economy, we've got businesses that are expanding. Some of the needs associated with those things are related to housing and what we want to see happen here. And so again, another reason we believe to be more intentional, instead of simply creating an incentive program that may or may not fund those things that the study identifies as being necessary. The next slide, please, Phil. And we also wanted to give you an idea of some of the possibilities for incentive examples once we decide the direction we want to go in. There are a number of things that we can do related to incentivizing both existing housing stock. There are some areas that we know need some upgrades to infrastructure. Maybe some of our programs target infrastructure, that being sidewalks and sewers and water, but also things that are talked about now, like EV charging stations and community Wi-Fi, especially in some areas that struggle to access Wi-Fi right now. We don't want to simply focus on, we know this, on new construction. Existing properties need some help as well. Could this program involve weatherization and new windows and roofs and porches and paint? We do some of that work now, but maybe this study will identify and show us that by investing more in those kinds of things, we can move the needle forward faster in making some of the improvements in some of these areas. And so really just wanted to give an idea of some of the things that we can do, and that's obviously not an all exhaustive list as well. But again, with this, we would recommend getting the study back and building the findings of that study into a program that we would create versus simply saying we'll do A, B, C, and D, and it maybe doesn't accomplish what we want to accomplish. The other thing I want to say is that, especially in the regeneration area, we don't want to assume that the residents who live there now, while some of the properties have fallen into disrepair, we don't want to assume that they want more of same. And so by asking the questions of people, it can give us a better idea of perhaps some of the things that we fund through whatever program we would create. So, Tim, the next couple are yours.
Thank you very much. Number 3, the third council initiative is Alderman Becker's. It's the cost reduction opportunities. Next slide. We were charged to find ways to reduce costs as an offset to the coming spending. This efficiency gain can be a much better source of available money than increasing the taxpayer burden. Start focus on options for consolidations and cooperation between entities and departments, gain the cost reductions and efficiencies. Next slide. Additionally, the goal is $1.5 million to $2 million in savings. Beginning focus areas are with the Bloomington Election Commission, county spending overlap, emergency call center, which would be Metcom, and our Bloomington Police and Fire Department's dispatch center. city township administration, and the ultimate municipal savings through internal opportunities. Next slide. Cost reduction opportunities, potential next steps, establish, formalize, intergovernmental meeting schedule. Changes should be collaborative, statutory considerations, limited in time and scope, and a deliverable report of possible efficiencies regarding the Bloomington dispatch and Metcom, and continue space master planning with the county. And then city savings report as a part of the finance director reports before the next budget cycle. Some additional, actually, next slide, Phil. And actually, do me a favor, go back. Going to comment to some of the things that already occur on a regular basis. We share this building that we're currently in. It's owned by the Public Building Commission. The county and the city are both tenants, but have a working relationship with previous county administrators, as we do currently with Cassie Taylor, the county administrator. She's actually proposed a few weeks ago to do a master plan space study for this space to see what opportunities we have. Past conversations that are at the very beginning, but curious, what opportunities do we have to consolidate some of the resources that we have in this building? Do we have an opportunity to combine facilities? Do we have an opportunity to create the hub as the true entry point of, in the first point of contact for not just the city, but also the county? So there's other opportunities. Township, those discussions have yet to begin. Have had very brief conversations with Ms. Skillrood in the past. The Bloomington Election Commission is one that I will point out that when we were constructing the hub and building this, really it was built around the Bloomington Election Commission. They were on the 4th floor of this building. The idea was to move them down to the street level to make them more accessible to the public. Also tie into what the county clerk's office provides the community as well. As we're aware, they hired a new executive director. So while they were very much part of the conversation as we were building out the hub, a new executive director comes in, and this is no criticism, but it was her professional opinion that the Bloomington Election Commission move out of this space, and there was a cost, for constructing that to the tune of several $1,000s. So we have explored some of the consolidation opportunities, and those continue. Possibly a suggestion is that we formalize that, and that possibly will satisfy, but definitely more to come. Next slide, Phil. This is the sole slide on Alderwoman Ward's initiative to reduce gun violence. Just a brief update. No, it isn't the only slide. That's what the initiative asked for. Is there an additional slide? Okay, we're going to end there, but do have two things to update. One, with the permission of Alderwoman Ward, have reached out to the town and to the county to see if this is something that could possibly be a larger conversation with some actionable items. But also in the meantime, while those are very premature conversations that we've reached out again to the town and the county, we've also learned from State Senator Dave Kaler, that with the approval of the state budget, goes into effect July 1st through July 30th, that there is a $500,000 line item for the city of Bloomington, and also a $500,000 line item for the town of Normal. And it's titled, I believe, Violence Prevention Initiative, and it's to address crime reduction and violence prevention. And this is going to be a grant that's administered through DCO. Alderwoman Ward was made aware of this along with Mayor Millawambwe. And this was just two very quick updates regarding this, and definitely more to come. I think I will turn this back over to you, Mayor. This was 4 quick updates on all 4 active council initiatives, and very much appreciate the patience of council to allow us to prioritize FY23. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, City Manager Gleason. I certainly appreciate the time invested in these initiatives, although you had quite a few things on your plate, particularly the budget, and certainly look forward to future developments in all these areas. Are there any questions? I'm being told that there are no lights. Oh, okay. I think Councilmember Ward, is that correct?
Yeah, I will just add to what was said about the Gun Violence Commission initiative that I have drawn up a basic structure for a proposed basic structure for the commission, and that is in the hands of the city manager. To add a little bit of detail in terms of drawing from community groups for membership on the commission, there is quite a bit of support from various community groups for participation in a commission like this.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Ward. Next is Councilmember Boland.
Yeah, I want to say thank you to the staff, specifically because I know that these initiatives were, it was voted to move them forward for further discussion, but with the council initiative process, staff really should not be putting this much work in my opinion, until the council has voted to put it forward for staff to do the work. So I want to say thank you for the staff for doing this, but I also would like to remind the council to try to focus on the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Boland. And I believe okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Did you
Okay.
did you hear me?
We did not hear the last part.
Oh, okay. I said Councilmember Craybill. I heard it.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just say I think we did follow the process here, and we all voted that staff would do some work on these initiatives. And I'm happy with the work that staff has done. Just a couple of quick comments on the green infrastructure initiative. I also think we should look at what other communities are doing, kind of what's the latest and greatest, right? I know that initially idling reduction technology was kind of a new thing, but now we're doing it. Having all electric garbage trucks is a little too much out there, but at least we know somebody's doing it. And then on the housing, there's a reference to land banking, and I know I'd mentioned something about that to Tim a while ago, but what does it mean in this presentation of land banking?
I think dependent upon what we hear from the study, and I don't want to keep saying that, but depending upon what we hear from the study, there could be a need to identify areas to bank land to do development going forward. And so does that involve gathering parcels in order to prepare for additional development? Or it could mean, in a more traditional sense, work to gather vacant lots when they could be accessible to people as side lots or other opportunities to expand their existing properties. I know that the McLean County Regional Plan Commission is working through an initiative related to land banking, and it could be as simple as partnering with them. But it's an option for either gathering land for for future development, or again, allowing existing property owners to expand their properties, or things like gardens or other green initiatives throughout our community. And so,
Yeah, and I know that, the city owns a number of abandoned houses, vacant lots, that type of thing that could be part of this. And then, let's see. Also, I think if we're considering giving, helping people revitalize their properties, I think we need to be careful about how we structure it. If we look at the Rust grant, for instance, I don't think that's being used much, if at all, because even the 25% that we're asking people to put up front can be a burden, and they don't get reimbursed at all until the work has been done. So they pretty much have to put 100% up front, which is which is prohibitive for most small business owners, downtown, to make their buildings accessible. And finally, I think we need to address, and Jamie's mentioned this before, with regard to outside companies buying houses and then renting them out. I think if that's we need to think of that as an issue, to address. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councilmember Craybill. I'm not seeing any other lights. And believe it or not, I can see them all from here. So we are going to go ahead and move on to the next item on the agenda. Oh, well, actually, it looks like City Manager Gleason has a comment.
We just had one question. I'm going to hand it back to the Deputy City Manager. It was on Council Initiative number 2.
thank you. And really, that question was based on some of the things that are happening. And again, it's not all it's not an exhaustive list. Do you want to proceed with the establishment of a committee? And that's obviously a council question. A green initiative committee. Sorry. And that's for you.
Yeah, thank you for the exhaustive response, and I do appreciate the time you took to prepare. I would say that at this point, I would want to get more information from people in the community who know a lot more and have greater expertise, and see if there is a way forward that would make sense to establish some kind of committee. Like you said, there's always more work to be done. And as Alderman Crable noted, there are things happening in other communities that could be instructive and helpful. So to be continued, but soon.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Ely. Councilmember Ward?
No, I don't have anything.
Oh, okay, all right, thank you. So moving on to the next item on the agenda, and thanks again, staff, for all your work on this. City Manager discussion. City Manager Gleason.
Very brief, 2 slides. And the first one, new summer book online at bloomingtonparks.org. Do visit that site. We will message on this, and I know that we have already. And then Party for the Planet events all April long at the Miller Park. Next slide, please. Prairie, Vista, and Highland, and the Den. All 3 city courses are open for the season. Very well attended, as Scott Rathman, the finance director, has shared in the past. Golfing is very strong in our community. We have 3 very nice courses. And then additionally, I was going to share, we have the downtown for outdoor dining set up. We made that pledge to the community to have that in place prior to the Easter weekend, and we did last week. I know weather didn't quite cooperate, but it was ready, and it became the business owner's decision if they were going to offer that up to patrons. But I would be remiss if I did not just give a special thank you to some of the city staff. In the Economic Community Development Department, Catherine Dunlap and Chris McAllister. In the clerk's office, Amanda Stutzman. Public Works, Phil Allen, Colleen Winterland and her crews. And then in Parks, Dave Lamb and Bobby Mays did an excellent job for us. So I wanted to recognize them. And then next week, for our last council meeting in April, we have a fair amount of economic development items. That's very exciting. That will be coming before council. We've prepped council in my city manager update. More to come this week. And then also we have a fair number of fiscal year end purchases. That is not uncommon as we close out the fiscal year. It's by design, and most are budgeted items, and that will be coming out when the agenda is posted as well. Any additional information that's required of council will provide that as requested. That was it, Mayor. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, I was muted. I think at this time, we do not have any other items for executive session, so I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Councilmember Bolden. Is there a second? Okay, it looks like Councilmember Motley, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Okay, we are